Please welcome Dr. Saj-nicole Joni.
Thank you so much. I need the clicker. Welcome, everyone, and good morning. Mary, thank you so much for that embarrassing but kind introduction. When I woke this morning in Orlando, I found myself just filled with energy and curiosity about what we could do here together today, so I just want to get right to it. We don't know what's going to happen. Today is 1 year, 1 week, and 1 day since Lehman collapsed, and with it collapsed the global economy that we had lived in for a really long time. Now, the world didn't collapse, but the world, I would say on that day, it was coming for a long time, but it really turned upside down. So I have some questions for you. In January of 2008, how many of you thought that we were on the brink of the world's global greatest recession since the Depression and the crash of 1929? How many in January of 28 thought we were almost there? A few, 2. I did too, but most of us didn't, right? How many of you think that the worst is over and that we're at the bottom now, or at or past the bottom? Look around. This isn't for me. Look around, okay? How many of you think that 210 is going to be better than 29? Most of you, but not all, right? Okay. How many of you think that 214 is going to be better than 210? Now you're saying, oh my God, she's crazy. Oh, but you all do. Answer. How many of you think 214 is going to be better than 210? Okay. You're thinking 214. How many of you are so busy trying to get done what you have to do today that you can't even think about 214? Right? Right. Why 214? Why did I ask about 214? 5 years out, but that's not the answer. That was the obvious answer. But now we're doing this together. So why? Well, I'm not really an economist, and there's some debate about this. But lots of people think that it's around 213 or 214 that we're going to actually have to start repaying all the debt collectively that we wrote when we were about to slide off the economic cliff and didn't quite. So in addition to all of the challenges that we have today and all your customers and suppliers have, right? By 214, we're going to be paying back debt. And I watched the financial session you had yesterday, which was quite wonderful. And that means that somehow, it's not on our balance sheets, but everyone, somehow, businesses, customers, consumers, families, we're all going to be paying this back in some form or other of taxes and other things. So, if you're not thinking about that question today, I urge you to try to get that question somehow onto your horizon, because it isn't just about 9 and 10, but we got some big things coming that we know are coming. If we pretend they're not, shame on us, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So I'd like to begin this morning by talking about Daniel Bouton, the former CEO of Société Générale. By the way, I'm going to do 2 cases this morning that are involved with financial institutions. And I don't want you to say, oh, yeah, well, that's them. It doesn't have anything to do with us. The stories are really important, and they were writ large on the global stage. They're public, so I'm using them. But the points are very relevant to the food services world, and I'm going to work with you to make those connections. But don't just say, nah, financial services, we don't have to worry. Okay, my friend, Daniel Bouton, former CEO of Société Générale. Any of you know him? How many of you have heard of him? Do any of you remember you've heard of him? Do you remember the Jerome Crevaille scandal when one of his traders almost cratered the bank? Some. Okay. So it's January 20th, 2008, and Daniel is in his office. It's a Sunday afternoon, and he's preparing for a board meeting that evening. Now, they had just found out that Jerome Crevaille had been making large, unauthorized trades. After 2 days and 2 nights of furious work, they had found out how big his bets were. At 4 o'clock, it was a tiny team of people who were on this. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of Bouton's most trusted lieutenants comes in and tells him that the open position of Crevaille is $75 billion. They both know that that is just about double the equity of the bank. The lieutenant exits stage left, and Bouton is sitting there. Now, thoughts are swirling through his head. You know, his bank at this current moment is unstable and could implode. He is not going to let that happen. He has spent the last 15 years building this bank into one of the most profitable, respected, and actually very conservative, as later events played out, really good bank in Europe, and here he is, okay? Now, his mind runs to this bank called Northern Rock. Have any of you heard of Northern Rock? No, I'm not surprised. It's a small bank in the UK. It was not well reported on here in the US, but in November of 2007, when Northern Rock's balance sheet became unstable, and they were the first bank to become unstable because of the mortgage mess, when word of that got out in England, there was actually, literally, physically, a run on the bank. People were lining up, screaming to get their deposits out. Now, the government of England thought that was a very bad idea for the country and the economy, and they shut it down. They nationalized the bank. That means that the shareholders lost every bit of value in that moment, but the bank was stabilized, and it's still a problem for the Bank of England today that they have nationalized Northern Rock. Okay, so that's in the back of Bouton's mind. If word of this gets out, right, panic will ensue. So as part of my plan for making sure that I get my bank safe, which I am going to do or die, that's prominent in his mind. Okay, it's 4:30 on Sunday afternoon. You have a board meeting at 7 o'clock. You're Danielle Bouton. What do? We have mics in the audience, and we're going to discuss this, because this isn't just for me to tell you a story. We got to talk here, ladies. We got to get real, okay? What do? You have a board meeting. You're Danielle Bouton. You have a board meeting. It's 4:30. You just found out, right? No one knows. 3 people know. What do? How big's the board? Maybe there are 10 or 12 people on the board. So Barbara says, you have to tell them. Everybody agree with that? Yes, everybody? To a person, no one's going to argue that? Okay, Pam would say not yet. Barbara says, coming back, I didn't say what you had to tell them. Well, so what do you have to tell them? Come on.
I guess we're in the same position he's in, because it's getting thrown at us, and he was probably sitting in his chair thinking the same thing, and the wheels start turning. So I would probably start laying out a plan of, if I say this, what are they going to come back with, to understand the answers that I would have to have ready to go, and then from those decisions or that dialogue that I would interpret, okay, this is how I would want to say it. Because you've got to have the, how do I fix it? So in order to know that, you've got to know what the question is.
Right, so Barbara's point is very, very well taken. So he has to start thinking really fast about, well, if I have to tell them, what do I have to know? Right? Because I just can't tell them, geez, guys, we got the biggest problem on the planet, la-di-da. You got to, you don't bring bad news without a plan. They may cut your plan down, but you better. So that's one thing. So that's swirling in his mind. But now Pam says here, maybe she'd tell him nothing.
Well, qualified.
Qualified?
I want to know my plan before I walk in.
She wants to know her plan before she walks in too. That's the not yet part. But you got 2.5 hours. Literally. You would cancel the board meeting. You can't. Because it would get out, and because you'd have to have a reason. So as a given, you can't. It's already known.
Okay, so what if you call the board ahead of time? You're not meeting.
You could call the board. So tell me your name.
Demetra.
Demetra says, Call each of the board members, say, we have a situation, I need more time.
Yeah, because there's
And
no
you're
way.
a board, now, okay, great, I love this idea. Now, who here has served on a publicly traded board? Okay, you're a board member, your panicked CEO calls you up and says, we have a situation here, we need more time. What do you say?
I'd say, let's get together. Yeah, I'm not saying that you don't have it right then and there. Whatever it is, 6 o'clock. If the man only just found out at 4 o'clock,
Right.
I can't imagine, I don't care who you are, that you could think that well, that quickly, to be able to work with the board and get the board, give them the information that they need. I mean,
Great.
right?
Great, hold that point, right? I think that's a great observation, okay? Do you have all the facts? Of course not.
Right, okay.
Right, you don't have all the facts. Very important point. You know enough to know you got a really big, mean, nasty problem, but you don't have all the facts, right? Important point. Couple more people? Anyone else want to weigh in? Please.
I would say that you would have the board meeting, and I think similar to what Dimitri said, you'd have it, you would say, I think you would headline the issue and say, we have maybe that small group of 4, whatever, but we have people working to develop all of the facts to make sure we can lay them out for you tomorrow, because I'm assuming it's a 2-day board meeting, right? And so, and a proposed plan of action, and you would be involving your people that help you with public communication, your
Okay.
financial people, all that. But I'd headline it, but a board has to stay focused on what they've got to focus on until they're ready to discuss it the next day. So I agree
Great.
with
So, a
not
couple
going
of
into
facts.
detail.
It's a great plan. I'm going to headline it for the board. I'm going to say we have to stay focused. And it actually was only an evening board meeting, so they didn't have a next day. It just so happens, okay? All right, so, do I have your attention? Okay. Let me tell you what he did. So it's 7 o'clock. He goes into the board meeting. Now, Daniel Bouton is someone well known for championing transparency, authentic leadership, good governance. He's written about it. He's instituted it. He goes into that board meeting at 7 o'clock in the evening, and he tells them nothing. And it was step 1 for him in a plan that he had put in place to get his bank safe. His number one, whether he's right or wrong, this is his number one thing, and he believes that any leak is at risk for putting the bank in not only jeopardy, but dead. Okay? And he has reason to believe that. Think about what happened to Bear Stearns and then later Lehman. Okay? But Northern Rock had already happened. So step 1 in his executed plan, he tells the board nothing. The next morning, early in the morning, he gets 2 traders, and he gives them the task of unwinding all of Curveil's positions. They don't even know how much they're going to unwind. They don't know their Curveil's positions. He works with them furiously for 2.5 days, and he works furiously with the investment banking community. He secures a capital infusion of $8.5 billion that he gets the deal done around, and by noon on Wednesday, he has called an emergency board meeting. And at that time, the positions are unwound. He tells the board everything. He tells them what happened. He tells them when he knew. He tells them what he did. He tells them why he did it. Net losses for the affair were $7.5 billion. That's a lot of money. But he'd had this new capital infusion of $8.5 billion. So by the time he told anyone, really, except for the couple of people who didn't know the whole story on the inside, that bank's balance sheet was safe. A bank was in no danger of imploding. They'd taken a nasty loss, but that's all that had happened. Of course, at that moment, they had an obligation. Thing went to the press. The whole thing blew up. The Curveil scandal, it's still been going on. Okay. Now, what do you think of his decision? Dimitra? Did I get that right? Dimitra likes it. Well, I kind of like it too, except what if you're a board member? If you're a board member, now remember, you know, in European countries, not all board members are, some board members are labor board members. It's a little complicated what a board is. It's a little complicated who might not. You're a board member. What do you think about this? Well, first of all, you definitely think, does Bouton trust me? Well, but then, But he has credibility with them, right? Now, what the banking world thought about this decision was they thought they thought, of course this was before all the crashes happened, they thought, here's a guy who panicked. By selling all that stuff off in 2.5 days, he took losses of $7.5 billion, but he didn't have to do that if he'd been more cool and calm and collected and sold it off over a month. He maybe only would have lost 2.5 or 3 billion. Someone ran a spreadsheet on that, as those wonks always do, right? Let's go back. You're a board member. And how do you feel about Bouton? Did he trust me, right? But, you know, I'm a board member. If he had told me on Sunday night, what were my obligations about disclosure, about making it public? Do I trust all my other board members? If I had decided to play with him and keep quiet and one person hadn't, what's my liability? So I think in the end, the reaction of the board members was quite mixed, right? They knew he didn't really trust them on some level, but they also knew that in some ways he had protected them with his own body. You know, he was dead. If this thing went down, he was dead. He might be dead anyway. And he didn't take any of them with him. Completely against what we all talk about as good governance, trust, high performance teams, right? That's why we're talking about it. Now, what happened is interesting in French, because I don't think this would have happened in the US. So as the scandal broke and the bank was safe, so nothing much happened except the scandal broke and they lost a lot of money and their stock went down, but not as much as you'd think. It was decided that because, I mean, the trading scandal had happened under his watch, which meant that under his watch, the bank had insufficient controls. And as CEO, he was responsible for the fact that this could have happened in the first place, lax controls. So in the end, they made him step down as CEO of the bank, and they put someone else in to operate the thing, and they kept him as chairman. That's what they thought about his actions. Now, he recently stepped down as chairman because when all the French banks had to take the equivalent of the TARP money from the US, he was so controversial that that was getting in the way, but that's a different story, fast forwarded a year later. Okay, now, what's important about this story, this case? What's so important about Daniel Bouton? Mics, come on, what's important? What do we learn? Please.
Each decision, I mean, you can look at both decisions. One saying, I'm not going to tell him, I'm going to get the facts, I'm going to do it.
Mike.
Has consequences. And the other one has consequences because, you know, I mean, in that given situation, both decisions will have consequences.
Both
Either way.
decisions have consequences.
To tell him or not to tell him.
Tell him, not to tell him, no good answer, right?
Well, as CEO, he was decisive. You know, he made a decision and he accepted the consequences. And, you know, as you mentioned, he kept his board out of it. He took the hit. He assumed all of the responsibility. And he saved the bank.
And he saved the bank. But he might not have saved the bank.
He
Could have
might
gone
not
the
have.
other way.
But he made a decision.
But
As
he made a
CEO, you
decision.
have to be decisive.
CEOs have to be decisive. Please.
I don't, there's no way to know this unless you heard it directly from him or he reported it as such, but I would venture to think that in 2.5 hours, it would have been a little bit difficult for him to put that master plan together. My guess would be that he had been strategic all along. When he had watched the prior bank fail and had seen what had happened, he had thought through the what ifs. What if this ever happened to me? What would my strategy be? What would step 1, step 2, step 3? How would I approach the board? How would I approach the public? How would I control not losing this bank? So my guess is that he was a strategic thinker all along.
I think that's right. He was well known as being a strategic thinker, but I think you give him too much credit. I don't think when Northern Rock failed, he really thought Societe Generale, his bank, was going to fail. And I do think that in 2.5 hours, this guy, he put together, he knew he had to figure out what he was going to do. He could have changed it overnight. I'm sure he was up all night. But he went in there with a true north of where he was headed.
Jolene Garankin, I really think that we have to look at all of the laws that we've put in place and
Good
to
point.
really decide, are they the best for every situation? Because this is telling us that all the corporate governance that we have in place today might not have been the right right direction.
Right, I forgot to ask you, is what he did legal or illegal?
I think he undermined the whole purpose of having a board of directors.
Where? Yep.
And I think he could have waited 2.5 days to communicate and come up with that plan, but he should have not finalized any deals. I mean, that's why our government's set up the way it is with the House Representatives, the Senate, the President, and the judicial system. And that's the check
really
and
good
balance that
point.
was in place, and he totally decided not
got it.
to inform the team.
You got it. I mean, actually, he couldn't approve the investment of the $8.5 billion without the approval of the board. But he had it all wired. It was all done. And what was the board going to do? Say, no, we lost $7.5 billion. We don't have any capital. No, we won't take the money. Like, he did. There was one little part of the governance that still worked. But your point is exactly well taken, as is yours. And is what he did legal or illegal? And, we can't get into French law and all that stuff. But the reality is, the answer is that it was gray. It was gray because you do have to disclose, but you have to disclose before you really know. Or, it's gray.
So he had internal controls. At the end of the day, the internal controls are his responsibility.
Right.
So we put internal controls in place, but then we don't test them. And as a person who sat on a public board, I would be insulted because you would think your board has some strategic value.
Yeah,
and although
exactly.
I appreciate being protected, at the end of the day, I don't feel protected because he made the decision for the board.
Exactly. He, in that action, which saved the bank, which they recognized, also said, I didn't need your strategic, you may be, I don't care who you are sitting on the board. At the end of the day, I decided what to do without the brain trust, the value of the brain trust. That's exactly what he did.
And ultimately, he's responsible for that internal control
And ultimately,
failing.
he knew, he was responsible for the failure of the internal control, and it was the board's responsibility to hold him accountable for that, and he knew that too. And he was absolutely, he was protecting himself.
You said early on that he was a person of transparency, but he was actually the very opposite
Exactly.
of that. And so to me, it's curious that they had enough confidence in him after the end of this to keep him as chairman, because he had really gone against everything that he as a person stood for. And so I think that part of it is really an interesting decision because he really wasn't what he said he was. A person of transparency and honesty, so.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Okay, so let me tell you, this is great. We have to move a little bit, but it's important to talk about these things, right? These are the big things, right? So let me tell you what I think is most important about this story. So what I think is most important about Daniel Bouton is you. It's each and every one of you. Because I guarantee you that as you lead, and as you lead at higher and higher levels, you will face what Bouton faced. Now, I hope it's not as dramatic and as high stakes and as in the press, right? But every single one of you will, and some of you are nodding, already have, faced very tough choices about the timing of disclosure and action, where the answers are gray, they have lots of unintended consequences, and you have to move. Now, this is the job of leadership, and your leadership really matters, and it really can get crushed. And we can't afford that.